Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. Welcome everybody to today's conversation on elemental energy. It's going to be a very interesting conversation because this is a topic that if you are on the far left side in this green movement and not wanting to use fossil fuels at all, it's people look at it as almost like a farce, but it's really important because it is one of the most practical things that we can do with continued use of fossil fuels, and it's carbon capture, utilization, and storage, also known as CCUS. And I've been wanting to have a 101 topic conversation on this for a while now because it is really important as it is a practical solution. So today I am joined by a colleague and friend. His name is Adam Green. Adam, welcome to Elemental Energy. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marcia. Happy to be here. My name is Adam Green. So I work as a carbon policy advisor. So my background is in power generation, health, safety, and environmental compliance management. And until most recently, where now I'm looking at kind of a global landscape of policy and regulatory frameworks that govern carbon capture, use, and storage specifically. But with looking at CCUS, I also get into a lot of hydrogen, low carbon fuels, and other energy transition sectors. So that's CCUS is my bread and butter right now. But there's a lot going on in this space, and I think it's a very exciting place to be.
Would you agree that it truly is one of the most practical applications for the reduction of carbon emissions?
Absolutely practical. The technology is proven. I mean, it's getting there. It's getting less costly. So right now we're at a point where some industries don't have any other option but to capture carbon emissions. I mean, these are industries like cement and steel that are creating products that we need to build the world, to build towns and cities, to build roads. So it's necessary. These carbon-intensive industries have no other option but to capture the back-end carbon emissions from their processes. So as CCUS develops and as we start studying how we can apply it to more industries and it becomes a little bit more widespread, we're going to understand better how critical this technology is going to be in getting to net zero and reducing our carbon emissions.
Okay, we already started getting in depth there. I want to take us back to the question I like to start conversations with because it is a very polarized topic for all of us in the energy industry is, do you believe in climate change?
Yeah, sure. I think the evidence is mounting. We're starting to see increased intervals or increased frequencies of natural disasters and other severe weather events. Obviously, there's a global temperature rise that is evident. So as much as we say we want to limit, here's the paradox, as much as we say we want to limit carbon emissions and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we're also faced with that energy trilemma where we have to think about the social aspects. We have to think about meeting basic human needs and meeting the energy demands, especially in countries that are impoverished or underprivileged or underserved. So we need to be able to have secure and affordable energy. And where we're at right now, renewables can't meet that demand. And other alternative energy sources can't. So we do have a continued reliance on fossil fuels and energy intensive processes, industrial processes. So carbon emissions are going to continue as long as we need energy. Carbon emissions will continue for for the foreseeable future. And that's why CCUS is such a critical technology, because it is the only option right now for these processes that we rely on.
Let's get right into CCUS 101. What is it?
Yeah, carbon capture, use, and storage. So as I mentioned, when you think about power, when you think about any fossil fuel energy or any industrial process that relies on the combustion of fossil fuels, you have a byproduct of CO2 that's emitted into the atmosphere. So a lot of these processes are absolutely necessary to meet basic human needs. When you think about power generation, cement production, steel production, hydrocarbon refining, any fossil fuel related business is going to have some point source of carbon emissions. So carbon capture, use, and storage comes in, and it's a technology, and there's a lot of different subgenres of the technology that are used, and it's put on either the back end or it's used to treat the fossil fuel feedstock, or it's a method of changing up the combustion process in order to harness those carbon emissions and CO2 or carbon monoxide, and ultimately reuse them. So there's the U and CCUS is utilization. So there are applications where CO2 can be used in products or as like in an industrial process, such as pH control or anything like that. But ultimately, what we're looking at on that's going to be large scale is sequestering or storing carbon dioxide in depleted oil and gas reservoirs, saline formations, a mile beneath the ground. So that's where the S comes in. And the S is a pretty hot topic right now. So we're excited to learn about where that industry is going to go. We're exploring solutions for making that process more efficient, for ensuring that it is permanent. So making sure those CO2 emissions stay embedded in those depleted oil and gas reservoirs or saline formations, so that there is no future release.
So I want to go back to the U really quickly. Another really important application is in oil recovery processes. What they do is they actually take CO2, they pump it downhole, and it helps with oil recovery. And it's already in use. That is something that actually in the Permian Basin, like they can't get enough CO2 right now. So there's a really interesting project along with CCUS called direct air capture. So not just utilizing it off of, processes, but we are actually taking air, sequestering it, sucking it in, cleaning out the CO2, and then taking that CO2 and utilizing it. So that's another form of CCUS that wasn't just mentioned here. But will you go into some of the applications of CCUS when it comes down to high level? Where does it plug in? Is it post-combustion, pre-combustion? Where do we fit it in our process?
Yeah, absolutely. So you named two of them right there. There's really three subclasses of CCUS that are being widely talked about right now. So you have pre-combustion, where you're treating the fossil fuel feedstock and removing some of the carbon associated with that feedstock before combustion. So pre-combustion. So if you have, and then the one everybody thinks about is post-combustion. So if you take a power plant, for example, a natural gas-fired or coal-fired power plant, and on the back end, before that flue gas gets to the chimney, you apply a carbon capture system, like an absorber and a desorber set. So and you inject a solvent. So there's solvents, there's sorbents, there's membranes. There's a lot of different technologies, a lot of emerging technologies. So we're excited to see where those go. But right now, it's typically solvent-based post-combustion carbon capture. And so a solvent is injected, it binds to the CO2, and then it is in a different column is removed from the CO2, and that CO2 is then compressed and dehydrated and taken to its ultimate end use. So whether it be utilized or whether it be stored, and then the clean gas is emitted to the atmosphere. There's also a third kind of subclass called oxycombustion. So upstream, you have an air separation unit that removes the nitrogen from the ambient air. So then you have a high concentration oxygen that is burned with the fossil fuel in the combustion process. And from that, you get a higher purity CO2 that can be captured more efficiently. So that's a third way to manage your carbon emissions at a point source. But like you said, direct air capture is using the same technology. So it is pulling ambient air. They look like a massive, if you're an industrial person, a big old cooling tower. It's drawing in ambient air, applying that same solvent-based or whatever the technology is process to remove that carbon, and then take it to utilization or storage, and then release the clean gas.
Isn't it amazing the technology that's being out there? The reason I did a happy dance when you were talking about the oxy-combustion process is because I'm going to give a shameless plug here to Net Power right now.
Mhm.
Like, have you been following Net Power at all?
I have. It's a very cool process. Yeah, I'm excited to see where that goes and how we can scale up that net power process. I'm excited they're getting the investment they need, and they're starting to make new project announcements. So yeah, I'm really excited. I know you had someone from Net Power on a previous podcast, so that was a very interesting topic.
Not yet, but I will. Danny Rice, if you're out there, you please call me. He's the CEO. So I really believe that technologies like Net Power, who their pilot plant has been in operation now for a while, it's that upfront, very clean capture. It's already part of the design. So when it comes down to clean, reliable, and affordable power generation, they are meeting all three of those goals, which is really, really, really important. So, okay, now that we've talked about, a high level overview of the applications of CCUS, why is this initiative being so heavily supported? I mean, obviously carbon removal, but I mean, it's seeing funding from the government. Just give us some oversight of why is it so important that we continue to progress this technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And I alluded to this earlier before when we were trying to, do the introductory session, but it is the only option for some processes. Carbon intensive processes like cement production and steel production, they have no other option. There's no other technology that is less carbon intensive. So all we can do, with the exception of offsetting at another, point, is capture the carbon emissions that they generate. So when you think about, and I don't have the percentages on hand, but what percentage of global carbon emissions is the cement and steel and other refining industries responsible for? It's a large chunk, and with no other option, we have to deploy these CCUS technologies to capture these emissions and take care of that piece of the pie. There's taxonomies out there that, like you said, don't agree with the prolonged use of fossil fuels through decarbonization and CCUS, and they think we need to go to a portfolio that is renewables based and hydrogen based. But in the meantime, while we're so concerned about energy security and affordability and meeting basic human needs, this is going to be a necessary technology, and it's going to be around for decades to come. And as we drive down the levelized cost and then make more sense on paper and in Excel spreadsheets, I think it's going to become a more viable option, and companies and industry are going to start embracing this technology and finding better ways to apply it at their point sources.
Adam, you've been completely discredited by not bringing those percentages.
Yeah, right. I mean, it depends on the source. It'll be, 7 plus or minus 10, or, so I didn't want to throw a number out there.
This is payback for the Marsha stab the other day.
I'll never let that one go, but then I'm not alone on that.
Oh, I'm just kidding, Adam. Okay. So obviously the initiative is so heavily supported because it is a need. Now, let's talk a high level carbon market. Along with the application of it being used, one of the things that is going on for this storage initiative is that companies are able to purchase carbon credits that have been proven to be sequestered. Companies like airlines, football teams, large hotel operations are actually able to purchase carbon credits. Give us like a high level overview of what the carbon market is in that scene, please.
Sure. Yeah, so there are compliance carbon markets, like an ETS, emissions trading system, that they have over the flagship one being the European Union's ETS. The UK has one, South Korea, New Zealand. So compliance credit market exists, and those have existed, EU started in 2005. Now, what you're kind of talking about is the voluntary carbon markets, and that is an emerging space and something that's been around for a while. So companies have been purchasing offsets from voluntary carbon markets to meet ESG goals, because they have if you're a company like Microsoft that has doesn't really have point sources, so they can't put carbon capture on because they don't have any emissions. They're a tech company, so they might have data centers and miscellaneous sources, but at a very high level, they need to purchase offsets to decarbonize their operations. And so this field has been around for a while. So a lot of it has relied on nature-based solutions. So if you think about nature-based solutions, think about avoidance of deforestation or reforestation or afforestation. And those processes are how carbon credits are generated. And then they're taken to exchange where companies like Microsoft or whoever it may be or airlines, like you said, can purchase those at a market price. What we're seeing now is a shift away from those nature-based solutions and the embracing of technology-based solutions like carbon dioxide removals via direct air capture. And there are even exchanges, carbon credit exchanges, that are devoted to selling high integrity credits that are derived from carbon capture, use, and storage operations. And you're right in that there's a rigorous standardized process for verifying these removals, verifying these reductions. And there are companies out there that have standards set up. There's a few of them that are reputable: Verra, the Verified Carbon Standard, the Gold Standard, the American Carbon Registry, that takes these credits and verifies them via their standard, so that they can be put on that exchange and sold as a credit to offset someone's emissions. And this is, like I said, the technology-based solutions are getting a lot more interest now. And as we see some of these carbon capture, use, and storage, and direct air capture, and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage projects come online, I think there's going to be a lot more interest, and these credits are going to trade at a premium.
The mechanical removal sounds much more verified than having a bunch of scientists go out there and hug trees and take measurements.
Yeah, it is. It's all about the measurability and the verifiability of the removals. And that's why CCUS and direct air capture are going to be so big in these markets. I just attended a conference that was all about the voluntary carbon markets and how they're going to scale up. And it was kind of exciting to hear about what's going on in that space.
I have been invited to a very interesting summit. I can't release a bunch of details yet, but it was amazing that when going through the application, they're actually tracking if people are attending by car or plane or train when it comes down to offsetting the carbon footprint from all of us coming to this summit in order to replace it in the form of purchasing carbon credits, because it truly is amazing. If anybody is interested in tracking their own carbon footprint, there are websites. You can just Google "track my carbon footprint" and see truly how large of an impact we have as individuals. It's amazing. So when it comes down to tracking these carbon credits, it's something that CCUS is making it truly possible in order for people like myself and like Adam and anybody out there who is listening to pay a little bit extra for your shipping costs to be offset, paying a little bit extra for your flight to be offset. There's an interesting perspective on it. I had Robert Bryce on my podcast not long ago, and he was talking about how it's interesting that we can just pay for our sins to be wiped away. And I was like, but that is made possible by CCUS, which is actually tracking the amount of carbon that we're reducing. And this is made possible through that application, which I just thought was a very interesting concept of erasing our carbon footprint. How do you feel about that?
You're exactly right. And I think I told you yesterday, so I'm getting married in a couple of weeks, and it's somewhat of a destination wedding, but I think 90% of our guests are going to be flying to the wedding. So when thinking about the greenhouse gas footprint of our wedding, I almost feel obligated to go out there and purchase some offsets. But I just saw an article this morning about new rules or new proposed rules from the European Union that are going to eliminate the capability for companies producing products to use offsets to claim that those products are green or those products are low carbon. So there's going to be a framework of rules that say, okay, unless you can't buy offsets to make your product green. And that was just this morning, so I've got a lot to look into there. But it's essentially greenwashing. If you go out and you're not doing anything at your process, right? You're just going out and using the profits that you make to buy some offsets that are on any market at any price, to say that your project is green, even though you're not changing any of your processes at the factory level or whatever it may be.
Adam, I am not an SME in this arena by any means. Are there any other topics or highlights of CCUS that others who are, trying to get a basic understanding of should really know about it?
Yeah, so we talked about the voluntary carbon markets and some of the market-based incentives that are there right now. and that are scaling up, but we need to think about the government incentives as well. So governments around the world are starting to view CCS as a necessary piece of the pie, the decarbonization pie. They recognize that it's a necessary technology to get to net zero and meet all of their nationally determined contributions for the Paris Agreement. So worked into a lot of the major policies that have been announced in the past year or two or three are incentives for specifically. So starting here in the U.S., everybody's heard about the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. It's been a topic of conversation for the past year. So in August of 2022, Inflation Reduction Act comes out. And in that, the 45Q tax credit, which is for carbon dioxide sequestration, was greatly enhanced. The amounts, the eligibility, the minimum capture criteria, that it was greatly enhanced. And now it's actually putting a dent in the levelized cost of capturing carbon. The 45, now that wasn't new. So the 45Q has existed since 2008. It wasn't really lucrative enough to make projects happen, though, until the passage of the IRA. Over in Europe, the Powering Up Britain plan, so they're even before that, the cluster sequencing plan. So they've got industrial hubs or industrial clusters that they're trying to make use of that are going to benefit from shared transportation and storage infrastructure. So if you get a group of industrial emitters in a certain spot, they're funding these, they're coming up with some sort of direct funding for getting these projects to deploy carbon capture at their industrial processes. And then they'll have shared infrastructure that can pipe it into subsea formations in the North Sea. Same thing with Europe. So the European Union, Australia, and some other jurisdictions have the market-based or the compliance market. So the ETS, it's similar in Australia, but it's the Carbon Farming Initiative, and they buy and sell Australian carbon credit units to cover their emissions. So it's kind of a stick approach as opposed to a carrot approach. But there are frameworks or certification frameworks out there that are going to allow for carbon credits generated from CCUS to offset emissions in those compliance credit markets. So there's major policy around the globe is incentivizing carbon capture, use, and storage. And I think project announcements and FIDs are going to start coming through, and we'll start seeing projects built, shovels in the ground.
So here's a really interesting question that both you and I have proposed. When you talk about FID, let's face where we're at permitting wise. South Dakota just had a CO2 pipeline permit rejected. Now, when it comes down to storage, we have a few more that have been approved, but I mean, permitting is a huge issue that these projects are facing right now. What can you kind of share on where we're at with permitting and elaborate? Like, how are we justifying almost? I mean, I know you and I have talked about this. We don't really know how a lot of our customers are justifying other than carbon credits, but like, this is a huge issue we are facing. How are we going to get our policies and governments like PHMSA for pipelines to permit these projects and make them hit FID?
Yeah. Well, permitting, or sorry, for pipelines is easier because we have natural gas pipelines, we've got petroleum pipelines. When you think about, CO2 pipelines can be safe. So, everyone points to the rupture they had down in Satartia, Mississippi. And there were some, there's a PHMSA report out there, and then the operating company has a response to that report. So I encourage people to go read that if they're interested in CO2 pipeline safety. But would you rather have a CO2 pipeline or a natural gas pipeline running through your backyard? I think the potential for disaster is a lot worse with petroleum pipelines and with natural gas pipelines. So I don't anticipate that pipelines are going to be the bottleneck as far as permitting goes. Now, storage, on the other hand, is kind of up in the air right now, because in the U.S. here we have, of course, in Europe they have storage licenses being issued, and they've got experience there. But in the U.S., the Class 6 permitting program under the underground injection control framework with U.S. EPA, they've got 100. Last time I checked, it was 119 applications open right now, and they've issued 2 permits. There are some states with primacy, so they have primary enforcement authority for the Class 6 permitting process, but it's a very nascent permitting program, and we're still learning, about how long it's going to take to actually get from administrative completion of an application to issuance of that permit and permission to store underground.
So explain to me in detail how people are achieving funding through these tax credits
Mhm.
if there are not permits for these projects. I mean, how is the government actually going through with allowing that tax credit break?
Yeah, well, it's really not happening yet. I mean, you can't inject CO2 unless you have that permit in place. So yeah, there's really no one collecting or claiming the 45Q tax credit right now. There's a couple permits issued, and there are operating facilities, but right now there's no large scale 45Q tax credits being collected because these projects just aren't built out yet, and the storage hasn't been permitted.
So nobody's going to hold you to these dates, but when do you think like the first true CCUS projects are going to be fully operable?
Yeah, we have. So I mean, I know of at least a few projects that have broken ground. So there's one in my hometown of Springfield, Illinois, that the University of Illinois is working on with it's a solvent-based post-combustion carbon capture on a coal-fired electric generating utility. So that's broken ground. Of course, the direct air capture facility in West Texas has broken ground. So we are starting to see shovels hit the ground. We're starting to see FIDs come through. So we're really going to know more how impactful that enhancement process of the 45Q tax credit from the IRA. We're going to know how impactful that was probably in the next 5 years, and then in the next 10 years. Of course, it sunsets at the end of 2032, unless it gets extended. I don't have a crystal ball for future policy predictions, but we're going to know a lot more here in the next decade about how impactful these tax credits in these appropriations from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're going to know a little bit more about how great they were or are.
So, Adam, it sounds like you and I need to go on a super deep dive within our industry to figure out how some of these projects are kind of putting the cart before the horse. And
Yeah.
I think you and I have our work cut out for us because this is a journey that you and I are both on. But I am so thankful to have this overview because I think it's really important. You broke it down very simply, very easily to say this is CCUS 101. Is there anything else that you think would benefit our audience to know about CCUS high level?
No, I mean it's being embraced worldwide. So policy is evident that this is a technology that we're going to need to meet our commitments, to meet our NDCs, to meet our ESG commitments for companies. So there's a lot of motivating factors here that are driving this industry, and I think it's at its highest point right now. CCUS has been around since EOR started decades ago, but for decarbonization purposes, I think the urgency is there. The motivation is there to take it to the next level and really start getting commercial scale projects built. So I'm excited. I mean, it's a great space to be working in right now, especially focused on the policy surrounding it. And I hope to see this industry flourish. You go to conferences. So there's a conference in North America that here in Houston, and in 2022 when I went, I mean, there were probably a couple thousand people there, and at least tripled in size. And you could tell that by kind of the energy on the floor when walking around that conference, and people were asking different questions. It wasn't what is CCUS, what are you guys doing in CCUS. It's okay, well, how many projects have you built, how many projects are you involved in, and just the questions are getting more advanced. And so you can see there's a new interest in CCUS, and a lot of that has to do with the policy making from governments.
I feel if we go further into things, it's going to become a 102 level course.
Yeah, right.
So, Adam, with that being said, I am thankful for your time and I look forward to continuing to work with you in this growth sector. But I think I'm just going to close this out with everyone. If you have any questions, please feel free to link in with Adam or myself. We are absolutely happy to talk about these issues openly, talk about these technologies. And if we don't know the answer, I promise you we can find the right person to direct you to. So that being said, stay happy, stay safe, and Adam, close us out, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to see you, Marsha. And yeah, if there's any questions, please send me a message. Always happy to talk about CCUS and government policy.
Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a podcast is released. Find Elemental Energy on Facebook, and connect with me, Marsha Leonard, on LinkedIn. But lastly, and most importantly, share this podcast with your family and your friends, especially if you are in the energy industry and you're having an influence on the path of decarbonization. I'm on this journey figuring things out, and I want you guys to come along. So the closer I can get to you and the more I can connect with you, the better this show will be and become. That was excellent. That was perfect. Like
Really
that,
good.
that's what was needed, because that kind of high level conversation is going to start helping people see that it's not such a complex concept.
Mhm.
Because this audience for elemental energy, I have a lot of people who are still in the oil and gas field and pipeline, like more of like midstream, downstream. So like not really understanding these full concepts. And I think that was a beautiful 101, what's going on with it, to make people a little more curious.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't go too much into the technology. I just kind of know the high level stuff. I get buried in the policy stuff and then forget to learn more about the technology.
No, that's perfectly fine. Some people start to get lost in process. So that you answered wonderfully. And you're so well spoken, Adam. Like, I am thankful that you are taking the initiative to represent Worley, because you are representing us very well. Like your post on LinkedIn when you were highlighted as one of our, Worley representatives,
Yeah.
so well deserved. And
Cool. Cool.
yeah, you're doing
Yeah,
good
thank you.
stuff, man.
I appreciate that. Yeah.